When I was in elementary school, my science teacher was apparently attacked by a creature resembling a Kappa on his way home. He was walking behind an irrigation channel when suddenly something attacked him from behind. It wrestled him to the ground, then dragged him away with amazing strength. He managed to stab the creature's arm with a pen he had in his pocket, and when it flinched, he ran to a nearby house. He explained what was going on, and nervously they armed themselves and went outside to check. But the creature was already gone. It had run off with my teacher's lunchbox. It was dark, so he didn't clearly see what it was, but it was around the size of a first or second grader with wet skin. It didn't make any sounds, but it was incredibly strong. So strong that my teacher, who was a skilled judo practitioner, could do nothing against it. When he told us this the following morning, he was frantic. We all trembled and some girls even cried. It was almost like we were there with him. He also brought it up at the staff meeting and recommended that students walk home in groups with adults patrolling the area. But no one took him seriously, so he tried to bring it up at the PTA instead. But again, everyone laughed him off. My mother was at the meeting and said he was really angry about it. Before long, that teacher took a leave of absence. Or maybe he was forced. And we never saw him again. No one brought up what happened and everyone soon moved on. That teacher was the only one who saw the creature, but he really didn't seem to me like he was lying. Nobody believed him, but he really saw it. Don't go near that channel or walk home alone, otherwise it might get you too, I tried to tell my friends. Hey guys, I'm your host Tara A. Devlin, and welcome to this week's episode of Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. In case you haven't picked it up yet, the latest volume of Kowabana, Volume 15, is now available, with over 170 stories from the show collected in easy-to-read format. If you're looking for more chills and thrills, then grab your copy now and don't miss out. This week, we're heading back to the countryside to uncover some horrifying stories of what lurks in the mountains, the rice fields, and the many tiny villages that dot the landscape. First up, a young boy is sent to live with his grandparents, and, while there, he meets a mysterious woman. Who is she, and what does she really want? Is she trying to help him or hurt him? Find out in Mystery Woman. This happened when I was in the second grade or so. My mother died when I was little, so I was raised by my father. Perhaps because I was being raised by a single parent, I was rather introverted, and I suffered a lot of bullying at school. This all started from the first grade, and by the second grade, I refused to go to school at all. In the end, I was sent to live with my mother's family in the countryside instead. They truly lived in the middle of nowhere, and I had no idea such places still existed in Japan. Anyway, my time there was pretty relaxing. There were fewer and fewer people living out there as the years went on, and the only other kids were 2 or 3 high school students, and that was it. Still, I liked being alone and I enjoyed catching bugs, so that was what I often did. The area was like a treasure trove of bugs. Around 6 months later, probably around August or so, I met a woman there. I think she was in her late 20s or early 30s, and she was a beautiful woman with long black hair. She was the one who approached me first. "Hey, you're not from around here, are you? Are you here for the summer holidays?" she asked. But then, perhaps noticing that I looked a little flustered, she turned to my insect cage. "Ah, you've caught so many. Can I see them? I loved talking about insects, and so I talked her ear off about them. That's amazing. Oh, I see, she said, replying to me often. Nobody had ever praised me like that before, so I was pleased as punch. After that, I saw her often. We often went to the fields and river to catch insects together, and we always met in front of the Jizo statue by the river. When I told my grandparents about her, they were like, so-and-so's daughter must have come back for summer. Don't bother her too much, okay? Because we lived in an area that pretty much no one visited, they didn't seem especially concerned about what I was doing. This woman was a mystery to me. She didn't speak much about herself, and whenever I asked her about her family, she always avoided answering. But she always listened to my stories, like how I was bullied at school, how my mother was no longer around, and other things I couldn't even tell my grandparents. Whenever I complained, she always comforted me with gentle words. I started to think of her almost as my own mother. When I told her that, she looked kind of sad. But not long after first meeting her, I strangely started to feel ill. At first, I thought it might be a cold, but I didn't have a fever, so I thought I'd be fine. What I hated most of all was the thought that I couldn't see that woman, and so, even though I didn't feel too good, I went to our usual meeting spot to see her. But I continued to get more and more ill, to the point where even my grandparents were worried. They kept me at home in bed, but I showed no signs of getting better. I kept complaining that I wanted to see that woman, and so my grandfather called who he thought was her family. But when he returned, he looked flustered. Who on earth have you been playing with? I called so-and-so's house and they said their daughter didn't come back this year. What's her name? What's she like? I was just as confused as they were, but come to think of it, I didn't know her name either. I told them what I could remember of her, and my grandfather started hurriedly calling around. I was confused as to why he was acting like that, but thinking about it closely, this was an area where it was impossible for a stranger to hang around without someone noticing. Everyone knew everyone, and if an outsider arrived, they were easy to spot right away. It was even more unlikely that someone could live there while still being a stranger to everyone else. Still, I was just a kid, so that didn't really occur to me at the time. After all that, we realized this woman didn't live anywhere in the village, and my grandparents were rather creeped out. So after that day, I was no longer allowed to go to that meeting spot, and I had to play near the house at all times. My health improved somewhat after that too, although I still didn't feel too good. I really wanted to see that woman again too, but I didn't want to trouble my grandparents any further. One day, I was looking for insects in the fields behind my grandparents' house around lunchtime, when I heard a voice. Hey! Hello! That woman suddenly appeared out of nowhere. I was ecstatic to see her, and once more we looked for insects together. But for some reason, I was still unable to ask the woman anything about her family. My grandparents were also somewhat nearby, but they didn't seem to notice her. That night, I decided to ask them about it. Why didn't you say anything to that woman when we were catching bugs today? Both their faces went pale. But you were playing by yourself today, right? We were watching you the whole time to make sure you didn't go too far. Both their faces stiffened, and then my grandfather rushed to call my father. I'm sorry, but you're going to have to go back with your father now. You can't stay here any longer," they said, as a sinking feeling filled my stomach. Now, this isn't something I heard until much later, after I'd already grown up. But apparently, lots of children used to go missing in that area long ago. There was a legend that children who didn't have many friends were often spirited away. But before they disappeared, they started to feel unwell. Apparently, my grandfather thought it was just a story so that kids would make more friends. But either way, I was acting weird at the time, so he decided to send me back to my father. I didn't want to go back and threw a tantrum, but they decided that my father would pick me up in a week's time. Until I left, I wasn't allowed to take even a single step outside of the house. My grandmother was worried about me the whole time, but I was mostly sad that I wouldn't get to see that woman again. On the morning of the day I was to leave, I was waiting for my father, crying on the veranda, when suddenly that woman appeared. I thought it was weird, but I still wasn't afraid of her in the slightest. "What's wrong?" she asked, speaking to me in that gentle tone like always. I told her that I had to go home now, and she looked sadly at me. "I see. I think that's probably for the best. Don't worry, I'll be cheering you on from here," she said. Before I left, I asked her one final question. If I came back, would I be able to see her again? But she just shook her head sadly and then walked away. After I got home, for some reason, the bullying stopped. I was no longer sick, and life continued like normal. But I never saw that woman again. And that's my story. I never found out who that woman was. Maybe she was a ghost. Maybe she was the one spiriting kids away. Maybe she was protecting me from being spirited away. Or maybe she was just a regular person after all. This happened a long time ago, so maybe parts of it might be a little different here and there, but it really was a strange experience I had. It's a little frightening to think about now, but at the time, I wasn't scared of her at all. It was just something that happened to me 20 or so years ago. In this particular village, they have a strange custom that must be followed during unlucky years. When one young woman reluctantly takes part, she finds herself suddenly in over her head. What's out there following her? Find out in Exorcism. It's not just receiving talismans from shrines, and especially in the countryside, there are all sorts of methods and customs that are passed down, so there may be others out there who have had a similar experience to me. Let me write it down. In my hometown, although even in the same village, methods differ depending on the area, when it's your unlucky year, generally 19 and 33 for women, you have to leave home on the evening of Setsubun, go to the nearest intersection, put down some mochi, and then go back home without turning around. This is a custom we have, and several rules have to be followed. 1. If there are any forks on the way back, you must take the road that leads home on the straightest path. 2. If you look back, then disaster will follow, so you absolutely mustn't turn around after placing the mochi. 3. Said mochi must then be picked up by someone from another family to ward off bad luck. These days, the person trying to ward off bad luck generally asks someone from a nearby house in advance to pick the mochi up to ensure the ritual is carried out. Now, with all that out of the way, I'm a woman, so when I was 19 by the old East Asian age reckoning, or 18 by international standards, I was in high school, and it was my year of bad luck. Our house was deep in the mountains, so it was around 8 to 10 minutes on foot to the nearest intersection. Not only that, but it was past the shrines and temples, even further downhill. The road leading to this intersection was of course only wide enough to fit one car. A lonely road with no houses and only the shrines and temples. But it was paved, and I'd been taking that road every day since I was an elementary school student. So there were times where I returned home rather late, but even in the dark, it wasn't that scary to me. My parents told me that I should perform the exorcism, but honestly, I found the whole thing too much hassle. I believe Setsubun was on a Sunday that year, and being my unlucky year, I didn't make any plans. I just stayed home until my mother pestered me to leave the house. "Go now, before it gets dark," she said. It was February, meaning the sun set rather early, so even though it was only around evening time, it was still rather dark. Nothing happened on the way there, and I don't remember what I was even thinking about. But when I arrived at the intersection and put down the mochi, the moment I turned around, I heard the sound of drums nearby. Den, 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 den. They hit rhythmically at a rather speedy pace, over and over. It doesn't sound like much when I put it into words, but it was honestly the scariest thing I've ever heard in my life at that point. It felt like something really was following me from behind. It wasn't like someone walking behind me, but rather the feeling of something closing in. I broke out in goosebumps. I was terrified, and yet I felt like I couldn't run. I walked with tears in my eyes. My mother told me very strictly to not look behind me, so I did everything I could to only look ahead. Thinking back on it after the fact, it was only a few minutes, but listening to that sound made the walk home feel like forever. As I was walking up the hill, a car then pulled up beside me. It was my father. I later heard that my dad had simply finished work for the day. He was self-employed, so he also worked Sundays, and was on his way home from shopping when he saw me. He'd left everything up to my mother, and forgot entirely that this year was my unlucky year. But in the moment, I thought my father was worried about me and came to pick me up, so I cried in relief. I quickly got in the back seat, but then I panicked, realizing I shouldn't look in the rearview mirror, so I closed my eyes. My father said something to me, but I wasn't really listening, so I don't remember what. I could still hear those drums, so I remained silent. As the car was driving, I could still hear that same sound following from the same distance behind me, and that sound followed me all the way home. My mother was waiting for me when I got back, and she was shocked to see me crying. I never cried in front of my parents. I told her I could hear some strange drums and it was terrifying me. I thought she'd laugh and tell me that I had to be lying, but when she saw how much I was crying, she believed me. But when my mother and my older sister, who was 6 years older than me, went through the same ritual, they apparently didn't hear any drums. I was happy my mother believed me, but when she said, "You probably heard the sounds of hell," well, that night I was too scared to go to sleep. Nothing happened to me that year, and in the end, I never figured out what that sound was either. Maybe everything was okay because the exorcism worked. I'm 27 now, and I live alone, but if I don't get married before 32 and change where I live on my family register, then I'll have to go back home and do the same thing again. But if I get married and move, then I can do it where my new husband and I will live. At the time, I honestly thought I'd be married by 32, but now that I'm 27 and still single, I've started to panic. I don't know if I'll hear that same sound again, but it's so scary that I honestly don't want to hear it again. It was just the sound of some drums, but it was so creepy that it made me feel true terror inside. I really don't know what that was. I thought the exorcism was just a normal ritual, like Shichigo-san or something. So I doubt I influenced myself in any way into imagining that I heard that sound. It was honestly the most terrifying experience I've ever had to date. The young man in this next story hates visiting his family home for one simple reason. Things get weird there when it rains. But why? What's lurking outside their house? Find out in When It Rains. This happened when I was a child. I hated going back to our family home during the summer holidays. The reason was simple. Creepy things would happen there. When I say my family home, I don't mean some desolate building. The house was surrounded by gravel. It was honestly kind of stylish. But once specific conditions were met, strange things would happen there at night. Those conditions were rain. When it rained at night, you could hear someone walking around the house on the gravel outside. All night, you could hear the crunching as it went around and around the house. When I was a kid, it honestly terrified me. I often went crying to my parents and grandparents about it. Now, this happened just recently. At present, my grandfather is dead, and my grandmother went to live with my aunt. So, because nobody lives in our family home anymore, I went to check it out and clean things up a little. The water and gas had been turned off, so I went to a local public bath to wash up, then ate dinner. After that, it started raining outside. Luckily, the house still had power, so I didn't have to rely on a torch, but being all alone, I didn't really have much to do, and there was no internet either. The rain then started falling even harder, so I decided to go to bed. As I lay in bed, listening to the rain outside, I suddenly heard the sound of footsteps on the gravel. It was still here. The footsteps went around the house with a regular rhythm, only occasionally spacing out. This went on all night. In the morning, I called my mother to let her know I was done cleaning and would be returning home soon. "Did you see any mice or anything weird?" she asked. It's been 10 years, but even now, the only weird thing here is the sound of someone walking around outside, I answered with a laugh. But then, my mother gave me an unexpected response. "You've been talking about that for a while now. Tico, my aunt, also said the same thing when she was a kid. If that's true, then it's been going on for much longer than 10 years, huh?" I never heard that my aunt also heard the same thing. I was curious, so I called her on my way back. Apparently, the sound of someone walking around the house used to bother her so much that she even went to boarding school to get away from it. "Sometimes those footsteps stop, right?" she said. "Why do you think that is?" "I don't know. Maybe they're looking for something," I said. "I think they're probably checking the inside of the house. Seeing what's in there, you know?" A chill ran down my spine. And that was how my weekend went. A young man on his way to visit his cousins in the countryside oversleeps on the bus and finds himself, well, somewhere unexpected. And not as alone as he thinks. What's out there with him? Find out in Final Bus. My cousins live smack bang in the middle of absolutely nowhere on the west side of Japan. It was a quiet, deserted village with nothing but rice and wheat fields. One night, my cousin asked me to go to the convenience store with him, and it took us around an hour to get there by bike. That was how desolate the place was. I was pretty close to my cousins, so ever since I was a kid, I used to visit them 2 or 3 times a year. When I was little, we'd visit as a family, but when I reached high school age, I generally went there by myself. So, on the night in question, it was winter during my second year of high school. It feels a bit mean to call it a minor station, as it was the second biggest, even though it was rather small, in the prefecture, but I got off at the train at this tiny, simple station and then got on the bus. As soon as you get away from the station, the lights become a lot more sporadic, so it's pretty much pitch black out there. Nights really are deep out in the countryside. Anyway, I fell asleep like I always do, and when I woke up, I panicked. No idea where we currently were. All the passengers were gone, so it was just me and the driver left. I asked him if we'd passed such and such station. Apparently, we had passed it long ago. The bus then stopped, so I got off and started walking back. I wanted to contact my cousin, but cell phones weren't a thing at the time, and there were no public phones around either. It was quiet, dark, and there were no houses or people around, so it was a little creepy, but thankfully it was a single straight road, so all I had to do was keep following it back. Around the time I found myself getting tired from walking, I found a rusty old bus stop. Suddenly full of hope, I ran over to check the timetable. The last bus for the day was at 6:50 p.m. However, looking closer, I saw something else had been written in crooked letters around 9 p.m. It said, "Final Bus." With things being as they were, I got scared and stood up. At that moment, bright light filled my vision. It was the bus headlights. It stopped right in front of me, and then the door opened. I took half a step forward, meaning to get on, but then I saw something absolutely unbelievable through the windows. I was so shocked I thought my heart might jump out of my chest. Every single passenger on the bus wasn't human. They were half human, half beasts. From the neck up, they were all foxes, cats, dogs, wolves, bears, even plants. But the rest of their bodies were dressed warmly and they sat there like humans. And they were all looking at me indifferently. When you exceed the limit for how much fear you can handle, your legs start to tremble and you can barely stand, right? I fell right on the spot and couldn't move. Then the bus left. I was perfectly safe. I arrived at my cousin's house late that night. I had no idea what happened, so I didn't say anything about it. But then, a few nights later, when my cousin, his younger sister and I were in the kids' room telling scary stories, I told them what happened. Both of them grinned and looked at each other. They seemed to find it funny, like it was the silliest story they'd ever heard. "Did they say anything to you?" the sister asked. "No, they didn't say anything. Why?" Then my cousin replied quietly, "If they didn't say anything, then it was an event, huh?" I had no idea what that was supposed to mean. I also had no idea why both my cousins suddenly started acting hostile towards me either. The next morning, I took the first bus back to Tokyo. I haven't been back to their house again since then. This next one's a famous tale of a ghostly parade you might happen to come across in Fukui if you find yourself outside on one particular night a year. But is there any way to escape these terrifying ghosts? Find out in Headless Procession. This is a story I heard a long time ago. Or rather, an old legend. It's pretty famous, so you've no doubt heard it before. If so, I'm sorry. Long ago, a lone old woman was walking through the castle town of Fukui in Echizen province with a lantern in hand. She was on her way home after visiting a samurai she used to work for a long time before. Spring arrives late in the northern provinces, and so she pulled her collar up against the cold as she walked. But then, she noticed some pale torchlight by Tsukumo Bridge. These flames grew brighter and brighter, eventually filling the entire bridge. Some torches moved around, while others remained frozen. The old woman was so surprised that she stopped to watch them. And then, suddenly, the flames went out, and darkness returned. But in that darkness, she saw what appeared to be mist spreading out across the bridge. Except that it wasn't mist. It was people. People wearing white armor and holding white bows and such. Some of them were even on horseback. They proceeded in silence, their white banners fluttering in the breeze. However, not a single figure in the procession had a head. Not the people, and not the horses. And this headless procession was coming right towards her. A chill ran down the old woman's spine, like a bucket of cold water had been dumped over her. Ah, how stupid of me. She realized that tonight was the terrifying April 24th. The moon never showed its face on the 24th of the old calendar, and yet, on this night, the moonlight was reflected in the rectangular space between the castle's pigeon gate and the inner gates. There was a legend that anyone who saw the moonlight reflected on the dirt of that area would die. But what was so special about April 24th? To put it simply, it was the day that Shibata Katsuie committed seppuku at Kitanosho Castle. The castle was engulfed in flames, and all his retainers also committed seppuku, or died at the hands of their enemy. This happened during the 15th year of the Tensho era, on April 24th. And the one who attacked him? None other than the famous Toyotomi Hideyoshi, although at the time he was still known as Hashiba Hideyoshi. Katsuie lost to this man who had formerly been a peasant. How mortifying that must have been. So mortifying that even in death, he couldn't die. And so, every year on April 24th, he rose from his grave as a spirit. One by one, the pale torches would appear, and then, when they all went out, they would start moving. The old woman was born and raised in Fukui, so how could she have so carelessly gone out on April 24th? Every house was sealed shut, the people too scared to even breathe. The old woman was filled with regret. The old woman blew out her lantern as she trembled in fear. Even if she ran, there were no side streets nearby. And if she ran, the Headless Procession would chase her. In that case, she had no choice but to turn around, not look, and let them pass. She turned her back to the procession, then squatted under the eaves of a nearby house and closed her eyes. Footsteps gradually got closer, and then finally, they passed by. The quiet sounds of people walking, horses walking, and armor scraping passed behind her. It felt almost suffocatingly long. Finally, everything fell quiet. The old woman almost crawled home in the darkness. Then she got into bed and fell asleep. The next morning, the old woman's complexion was so bad that her son asked her how she was doing. At first, she kept quiet. After all, even if you saw the procession, you were never to speak of it. If you did, then you would spit up blood and die. Everyone was told that when they were young. And so, she didn't say anything. I will not say anything, she thought. But then, her mouth began to move of its own accord. She said it before she could stop herself. As all the energy drained from her body, she readied herself for death. But the old woman didn't die. Everyone sighed in relief and thanked the gods. However, the following year, on April 24th, the old woman staggered out of the house and was never seen again. A small village seems to be haunted by a rather odd monster. A monster that has been in the area for decades, and perhaps even centuries. But what is it, and what does it really want? Find out in Japanese Apparition. This is a story I heard a long time ago from my grandmother. The area where my grandmother lived was often hit by air raids during the war. One night, the alarms went off, so everyone started running to the shelter. But then, the shelter was hit, so everyone readied themselves for the worst. Next thing they knew, they noticed a child nobody had ever seen before, standing in front of the crowd, looking up at the sky. It was a small town, so everyone knew everyone, and nobody knew who this boy was. Then, as the boy continued looking up at the sky, his body stretched and expanded, like he was blocking everyone from view. The bombs hit the boy's back, and he appeared to be on fire. Everyone watched in stunned silence, but they were also afraid that the flames would fall on them, so they all huddled together and covered their heads. The boy continued to cover my grandmother and the others, protecting them from the raid that kept going. When it stopped, the boy returned to his normal size, bowed his head, and then continued on his way. Thanks to him, nobody was injured. After the war, my grandmother's mother and some of the locals went around asking if anyone knew about the child apparition, as they would like to thank him, but nobody knew anything. My grandmother had no idea who that boy was, but he had protected them. And whatever he was on Japanese soil, and so he had protected the Japanese people. There's a similar story passed down in my hometown as well. Several hundreds of years ago, my hometown used to be a small farming village. During a great famine, one boy stretched his body out, crossing over the mountains and bringing back all sorts of fish, nuts, and rice in his outstretched arms. He then dumped it all in the empty rice fields. The boy brought them food like this several times, and thanks to that, the villagers were able to survive the famine. On the other hand, there's a ghost story passed down that tells of a man who stretches his neck and arms, following people like this all the way home. A few days later, that person then dies. These are just parts of stories from my grandmother, the local archives, and the tourist information centre and such, but there's clearly something unknown in our town. And finally, a young man encounters a pilgrim on his way around Shikoku. This pilgrim, however, is carrying something strange on his back. What is it, and why? Find out in Pilgrim. This happened last summer when I was on my way back to the countryside. It took about 2.5 hours to get there by car, and of course, it's pretty tough driving all that time. So, on the way, I stopped at a convenience store for a break. I moved around a bit, put in some eye drops, then drank some tea. And then I saw a pilgrim walking towards me from the east. Well, it was summer, so there were more pilgrims out at that time of year. It was hardly a rare sight. But looking closer, this guy seemed to have a straw doll or something on his back. He put his stuff down at the door, then went inside to buy a drink. I thought it would be rude to stare, but that straw doll looked more like an actual person wrapped in straw, rather than something made of straw, so it was honestly rather creepy. Why is he carrying a doll? I was so curious that I couldn't help but stare. Then, as the pilgrim exited the store, he seemed to notice my gaze, so he spoke to me as he put his drinks away. "You look like you want to know why I have this." "Yeah. I often see pilgrims out here, but you're the first I've seen carrying around a doll." "Ha ha ha. This is supposed to represent my wife." "Your wife? You mean?" "She died last year. Depression. I feel terrible that I never noticed how she truly felt." "That must have been very sudden and upsetting." The man said he was from Saitama. Then we briefly chatted about nice places we'd visited in Shikoku and such. I guess we chatted for around half an hour when the man stood up, picked up the doll, and said it was time for him to get going. I also wanted to get back to the countryside by lunchtime, so we then said our goodbyes. "Okay, I'm heading west, so hopefully I'll see you again sometime. Take care." "Yeah, thanks. You too." I left the parking lot and looked at the pilgrim in the rearview mirror. He raised his right hand to wave at me. It would have been nice if his wife could have joined him, I thought. The very next moment, the passenger's side door of my car flung open with a loud clang. I say flung, but when I looked at it, it was only half open. I was going 60 kilometers an hour, but if I hit a person or a bike, it certainly wouldn't end well. So I pulled over on the side of the road, then reached over to pull the door shut again. Sighing, I sat back in my seat, put my seatbelt back on, then checked my right mirror, then my left mirror. For just a second, I could have sworn I saw someone's hair in the passenger's side mirror. What the hell? I jumped and looked in the rear view mirror. In the distance, the pilgrim had stopped and was waving at me again. Behind him, the right hand of the straw doll seemed to wave too. I was so scared that I slammed on the accelerator. I was too terrified to even look in the rearview mirror again. Once I got back to my grandfather's house in the countryside, I told him about the pilgrim I met at the convenience store, and he sighed. Long ago, it was often said that if you shape something like a person, then it's easy for a soul to possess it. Whether that was his wife's soul or something else walking with him, however, I can't say. That's silly. It sounds like something out of a comic or a movie. You simpleton. The same goes for straw dolls and ichimatsu dolls, right? You shouldn't carry things around that are shaped like people. I'm sure he was just thinking of his wife, but his wife's soul isn't the only thing hanging around, you know? I never saw the pilgrim again after that, and according to a friend I knew at the nearby temple, they never saw him either. I asked around at some nearby stores as well, but I've never seen anyone in the 40 years I've been here carrying around a straw doll on their back. There was nothing wrong with the door lock on my car, and nothing weird happened to me again after that either. A huge thank you and shout out to this week's Kami tier members, Ella C, Emerald, and Kenneth Kawamoto. It's thanks to your support, along with everyone else, that I'm able to keep doing this show, so thank you very much. Don't forget to check out Kowabana Volume 15, out right now, and check out our merchandise store at kowabana-shop.fourthwall.com. And if you'd like to chat about this week's stories, come and join us in the Kowabana Discord. You can find that link in the description or on kowabana.net. You can also check out our Patreon at patreon.com/TaraADevlin for exclusive bonus stories and extras, or our YouTube channel at youtube.com/KowabanaJapan for all sorts of Japanese horror you won't find anywhere else. Thanks guys, stay safe, and I'll see you again next time for even more Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. Want even more scary stories? Head over to kowabana.net for new translations every week. You can also join our Patreon for exclusive stories you won't find anywhere else. Head over to kowabana.net now.